Let me make sure I hit record. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping items to cover. We're going to use the Zoom chat for all presenter questions, so feel free to submit them through that, and we'll cover it at the end. There will be about 15 minutes for the Q&A at the end of the session, and feel free to chat me directly if you need anything or if you are noticing any technical issues we need to address. I want to go ahead and introduce our panel of staff from Texas A&M University-Commerce. First, we have Josephine Rickman. She's the Library Associate for Special Collections. Sawyer Magnus, Assistant Archivist. Laura Adams, Assistant Archivist. Adam Northam, Digital Archivist. And there's one more presenter who hasn't made it yet. He apparently got caught in a storm. Hopefully he'll get here in time, but his name is Jason Douglas. He's the Associate Director for the Office of Intercultural Engagement and Leadership. So I'll go ahead and let you guys get started.
All right, thank you, Danielle. So all of us here, we've been working on this project for over a year now, really, where our collaborative effort with the Office of Intercultural Engagement and Leadership to really promote and highlight, not only in this first example, our Latin American community on our campus, but also other minority groups as well in general. And so after that brief introduction with what we've been doing, I'll jump into my part of the presentation. Joe, if you would go ahead. So I'll be sharing with you all, and I'm Sawyer Magnus, Assistant Archivist here in our Special Collections and University Archives Department. And I'll be talking a little bit about the research and information gathering aspect of our exhibits and how we establish our narrative. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background about us. So we're the Special Collections and University Archives Department as part of the Velma K. Waters Library on our campus. The archives itself, we've been in existence since at least the 1970s. Originally, we focused mostly on university history, and we had an expansive oral history program as well that we monitored and conducted. We've also expanded to a wider variety of local history in terms of Northeast Texas more generally. In terms of our exhibit background, really we had focused mostly on using spaces within the library building itself, as well as our own smaller display cases that we had within our own space in the reading room area. Next slide. So of course, when this opportunity presented itself, we jumped on it very quickly. And whenever we were approached by Jason about this particular project, we had a few things we had to really consider. Part of it was in terms of our collections. So we came up with an initial list of options based on our own collections, manuscript collections, as well as some other materials and rare books that we may have had about some of these individuals as potential options for topics to consider for our first exhibit, as well as a simple collection survey that was related to some of these general display ideas and topics, which you can see to the right there on the screen. But one thing we really had to consider was what the mission of the Intercultural Engagement and Leadership Office was. It was a relatively new office. And so we really wanted to make sure that we were following their new and revised mission, which hopefully Jason will discuss a little bit more when he comes later. But we also wanted to keep in mind the upcoming heritage celebrations, since we were approached in August about this. We had coming up, especially Latin American. Sorry, accidentally muted myself, as well as the Native American Heritage Month. And so we really want to find something that kind of fit in that scope too, as well as to fit in with the grand opening of the office. And of course, we had time frame limitations because we were approached about this in early August, and we wanted to get something up by mid-September. So we had a very quick turnaround of about a month and a half to try to put something together for an exhibit. Next slide, please. So in terms of organizing our information generally, we decided that we wanted to work and group things together based on significant people at our university related to our after establishing that, of course, that the Latin American community is who we wanted to focus on, we decided to go based on organizing by categories. So significant people on our campus, student organizations, most specifically, campus events related to the community, and then some current issues as well that were really important to the Latinx community on our campus. And so we did this in part, of course, based on the wall space we had provided. We determined that we wanted to do more of a text and image based exhibit as opposed to using actual artifacts, just because of the space we were using, and we will talk more about that later. But in terms of putting information together, we used a Google Doc to put all of our information in one place that would allow us to edit, to keep track of things that we still needed to find, things that we already had found, sample text for the actual, to go and accompany the images, and then samples of the images themselves. You can see an example of some of that work there on the right side of that screen. Next slide. And so I just want to touch on just some of the resources that we end up using. So in terms of things that we actually had in our collections, we had our student and local newspapers, which were very useful for some of our current events and current issues related to communities, as well as some previous news stories about individuals and also groups as well. Our yearbooks, especially for student groups and organizations, when they were founded and things like that nature, were very helpful. Our vertical files also for newspaper clippings and other assorted odds and ends that we have, that many archives also have, were very helpful for in a lot of different ways. And our university photographs, especially for some older student organizations and some of the other individuals and events that happen on campus. Next slide. And then there are also some other items that we use that weren't necessarily part of our actual archives and special collections here, but were available to us. Trailblazers is a book you can see to the left there, the front cover of it, which we do have a copy of, but it is sort of a set of biographies of significant African American and Hispanic or Latin American individuals on campus. So really that was very helpful for important faculty members, especially some students as well. I'm talking with professors to try to get information about student organizations that maybe were relatively new, maybe hadn't been in existence for quite a while, but who had information and knowledge about these people and who to contact to get more information. Our marketing and communications department for the entire university, they maintain a lot of their digital photographs online on SmugMug and on Flickr. And so we use those extensively for more recent celebrations and events and things of that nature. And our student organization websites were important to glean some of the information about those organizations, as well as contact information for current student leaders for those organizations, to see if we could receive more information that way. The next slide. And I just want to round off by suggesting some advice on things that we learned through this process. First, be sure to use all the resources you have available, regardless of whether they are part of your own collection, or maybe there's other resources that aren't just physical resources, or professors or student organizations, alumni that had resources that we didn't have right away. And that feeds into the next point, which is involving as many stakeholders as possible. Making sure, and that will come into play later, I'm sure, but making sure that the students, faculty, current and former faculty and students and alumni and other staff members are aware of what we are working on, so that we can provide the best content possible. And finally, that the narrative is important, especially with sensitive topics. With the current events, we discussed DACA, we discussed other, our legislation and other things that were really important and very significant, especially to the Latin American population, but our general population at large. And so understanding that it's important to make sure that we provide a very solid and significant amount of detail for these topics, and not try to hide anything or push anything under the rug, but also making sure that things are told with an obvious, relatively fair viewpoint, but a viewpoint to where we actually talk thoroughly about these issues is very important for us now in this first exhibit and going forward with future exhibits. And I believe, excellent, I think that's it. Now I'll turn it over to Joe to take over the next section.
Hi, my name is Josephine Rickman. I am a library associate in the archives, and I'll be describing practically how we assembled the exhibit. So this is an image of, you can kind of see the full exhibit. It's a little bit awkward because this is a hallway, which is the exhibit space that we were given to work with. This is in the Office of Intercultural Engagement and Leadership, so the office that Jason is from. And this is a blank wall as a part of a hallway in their office. And you can see a couple of things that played into our design of the exhibit, which includes this column that juts out of the wall and a light fixture. These were things that couldn't be removed, but we wanted to be able to kind of work around them without them seeming too intrusive. And so that's one of the reasons that we decided to split the exhibit into 5 different sections. Not only did it keep our research focused, as Sawyer discussed, but it also helped with layout. The other thing you'll notice pretty immediately is that this exhibit reads from right to left. And the reason for that is that this title card, this part of the hallway can be seen from outside of the hall of the Office of Intercultural Engagement and Leadership. And we really wanted to draw people into that office who hadn't been there before, get them acquainted with what they do, and also get them acquainted with special collections materials. So it made sense to have the kind of introduction text on the right-hand side. Of course, the exhibit can kind of be read in any order, but we wanted it to make it very obvious that this was, you know, something to see, something that people could look at and not kind of just things on the wall as decoration. So I had never created an exhibit from scratch before. I had no experience with that. And one of the things that I really wanted to do was to create a mock-up of the exhibit. We had a large amount of space, but also a large number of images and text blocks. And I couldn't imagine in my head trying to fit all of that, you know, print it out willy-nilly and then get it on the wall somehow. So I began to do research into mock-up programs, and most of the ones that I found were for art galleries, and there was some sort of cost involved. And we needed a solution that we could get immediately, wouldn't have to go through an approval process, and that was free. My original plan was to use Microsoft Publisher to create the mockup, but to scale everything down by, you know, X percentage, and then upon printing, be able to scale it back up. But what I discovered was that you can create a document that is 20 feet long and 20 feet wide. So you don't have to scale anything down. You can bring in your full-size images, your full-size text blocks, and then export them, and don't have to do any of the math, which appeals to me as a former English major and person working in the archives. The other great thing about Publisher is that you can easily move things around, scale text. I ended up creating 2 Publisher documents, one for the long side of the wall on one side of the column, and the other for the shorter side of the wall on the other side of the column. And I was able to create a table with kind of gray lines in the background to represent the physical space that we were working with. So each of these gray squares that you can see in the background on the screen is 1 square foot of space. And that helped to keep things like these titles where it says student organizations. Those were all 2 feet long. So it was really easy to size those sorts of things. Most of our images were presented as is. We generally digitize them as master quality scans with standards that Adam Northam has set up in the past. We did have some low quality images from yearbooks, but because of the resolution we were able to scan them at, they looked okay scaled up. We also have a poster printer in the library, which helped to reduce cost and allowed us to reprint things when we might have made a typo or something like that. The other thing we considered for the exhibit, and especially the text, was accessibility. We wanted the font size to be large. Some of the exhibits we've created in the past have had really small font size, like 12 point, and while that's maybe readable on a computer in an exhibit, you're looking at it from different directions, or if it's in a cabinet and there's some glare with the glass, we've had those sorts of issues. We literally ended up printing examples of different fonts and different sizes and posting them on the wall in special collections and walking by them, seeing what we liked, seeing what was readable. We settled on Calibri 28-point font. The other consideration was language accessibility. And this was something that Jason actually brought up towards the end. It was an idea that he had, that because this exhibit was celebrating Latinx heritage on our campus, that it should also be in a primary language that is spoken by that group of people. And we agreed that this was a really important point. And luckily he had a student that was able to quickly and accurately provide us a Spanish translation. This did impact the design of the exhibit because at that point I had already created a mock-up and we suddenly had twice the amount of text. But again, that's where Publisher was really nice in that we could very easily move things around, come up with an alternate design. Here's an example. You can see that we have even on the title card an English and Spanish translation, and then below it, side by side, we have you know, an English and a Spanish translation. We finally got to printing, cutting, and mounting the images and text. We were able to cut everything down to size, leaving a white border that we could cut off later. We used both spray adhesive and mounting tape. We found that spray adhesive was really nice for smaller pieces of text and smaller images, but it is very messy. The other thing though is that it's cheap. The mounting adhesive is not, it's really expensive. And luckily Jason's office was able to share the cost with us along with the foam board, which was really nice. And it allowed us to more easily lay down large poster sizes and be able to smooth out any air bubbles. The spray adhesive didn't do as good with that. We also had student workers from Jason's office and from Special Collections who were able to assist with this part. We're finally able to get the exhibit on the wall. I created printed the mock-up that I had created in Publisher, and I ended up labeling all of the pieces with alphanumeric identifiers. And this was so that we would know exactly what order to put things up on the wall, but also so that if we had any student worker assistance, you know, Special Collections people had been working on this exhibit for a long time, so we knew, you know, what caption went with each image for the most part, but we wanted student workers to be able to help us very easily as well. It took us about 2 days to assemble the exhibit. We discovered that using a level was very necessary. We adhered to the wall with command strips because we wanted to be able to easily remove the exhibit and put a new one in its place without damaging the walls. The other thing that I created and used were foam board spacers. So I cut long strips of foam board, 1 inches wide, 2 inches wide, on up about to 5 inches. And so we were able to use those to precisely, get 2 inches of space within, between the picture and the text without having to use a ruler and measure and mark on the walls more than necessary. And with that, I will throw it over to Laura.
Thanks, Joe. Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Adams, one of the assistant archivists in the Velma K. Waters Library here at Texas A&M Commerce. And my portion of the presentation will discuss some reflections from the Archives Department over the course of our partnership project with the Office of Intercultural Engagement and Leadership, especially relating to collection management and outreach and some future directions for us in special collections. So here's just an overview of learning moments for the Archives Department. We learned how to bring archival materials to a broader audience through collaboration. And I'll share a little bit about the impact of civil discourse on our campus and how exhibits can contribute to the conversation about diversity and inclusion. And I'll also just share a bit about how this collaboration became a kind of case study for us because of the difficulty in finding extensive information. It did become apparent that there are gaps representing diversity in our collections. And then finally, I'll also share a bit of the future initiatives that the Archives is planning in order to ensure continued and significant contributions from our department towards this partnership. Next slide. So audience, one lesson learned is how the Archives might support a new audience. And by putting our exhibit on display in a location outside of the library, offered an opportunity to showcase our collections to a broader audience. This non-traditional collaboration increased access to collections that represent the different communities that we serve. And this is an effort by the Archives to create an interest in history from broad groups and to make historic materials more visible and relatable to as many people as possible. In this collaboration, our shared values drove the partnership. We value creating stories exemplifying campus diversity and inclusion. By focusing on a display of Hispanic heritage materials, we were able to tell a story about important contributions and experiences of notable people, activism, campus events, and student organizations comprising social life, Greek life, as well as share with the audience historic mentorship programs and like grant funding opportunities related to Hispanic heritage throughout the institution's history. And by the way, the images on the right are from the old library on campus over the years, perhaps representing the more traditional exhibit audience of library goers, since many of our exhibits were displayed simply inside the library building. Okay, moving on. At Texas A&M University-Commerce, civil discourse is considered a deeply necessary topic due to the climate in today's society. And on campus, civil discourse is used to create dialogue to nurture diversity. This diversity initiative is supported by the highest administrative levels at the institution. And so much of this work is done by the Office of Intercultural Engagement and Leadership. Diversity it's stated in the university's guiding principles to foster a culture of inclusion. And then there's another initiative by the President's Office to create a committee who are charged to explore themes and bring together experts in the community for discussion and education of topics and concerns. And in the Velma K. Waters Library's strategic plan for 2020 to 2023, specifically goal number 3, is to create an inclusive community with 3 objectives: to create, preserve, and increase access to culturally relevant information resources to elevate historically underrepresented voices. And importantly, this partnership is the archives taking a stand. We want to contribute to raising awareness and aligning our support. We wish to be part of the conversation to say that we stand with our institution in condemning systemic racism, violence, and discrimination. So this partnership with the Office of Intercultural Engagement and Leadership is one way that the archives could show commitment to these shared values. And one other thing related to this is that the archive staff learned it was helpful to create a public product, like an exhibit, to promote inclusion, and that exhibitions are an effective tool to illustrate diverse community histories. Next slide. So lessons from our collection. I mentioned before that this project became a little bit of a case study for us that gave us an opportunity to reflect on our collections. And even though a variety of topics related to Hispanic heritage were found in the archives and staff were able to build an exhibit telling a very rich history about Hispanic culture, it was still clear that our collections in general seemed to lack materials that represent diversity on campus, and that we would need to address how to collect a more comprehensive historical record inclusive of all groups moving forward. And another area that needs to be addressed is access, because public access to these materials in the finding aid database is limited. And we need to enter materials that represent a more complete historical record of campus diversity into archive space. And it also had us thinking that if public access is limited, how do researchers find resources related to campus diversity? And that answer points to a further dilemma in that researchers must depend on staff to locate information because staff are the record. And so this combination of having fewer materials representing campus diversity and the problem of limited access to these materials, and along with researcher dependence on archival staff's knowledge of unprocessed collections, is driving many priorities in the department to address these shortfalls. Next slide. In terms of where we're headed. So we have begun to scan and upload selected items used for display, and this content is now available in our digital library and Content DM. And we now also save content that's gathered for research into a ready reference database and use that database as a future reference guide temporarily, because we don't want to lose that research. And, archives, we're really pleased with the benefits from this current collaboration because it has established continual promotional programs for our department. And we're grateful for the opportunity to share archival resources. And we do plan to continue to build exhibitions in partnership with the Office of Intercultural Engagement and Diversity. And that office is located in our Sam Rayburn Student Center, and the image of that building is shown here on the slide. And so one initiative is to be proactive with collaboration. We plan to offer exhibits showcasing diversity as rotating exhibits across campus. And we hope doing so will help build relationships with our stakeholders and make the archives more visible to the institution overall, as well as continue to raise awareness and showcase diversity. We want to update collecting practices. We discovered we need initiatives that will help us develop more diverse collections reflecting the student body. And one way the department has begun to do this is by increasing archival awareness among student organizations. So since the collaboration began, the archives has been actively seeking both digital and print primary source materials related to student groups in an effort to preserve materials that represent a more complete historical record of campus diversity. Another initiative to help our collecting practices is to complete a comprehensive inventory project. This is a project, it's a much larger effort in the archives to inform our practices as a whole and give staff a fuller picture and gain better control of the materials that we do have. And we've also been discussing creating a formal statement about diversity to add to the department's collection policy, because it will noticeably align archives with the entire library's strategic goals, as well as the university's. Also, we want to capture data representing diversity. It seems like it takes more time to uncover archival resources for underrepresented groups because there are fewer accessible records in our collection for these communities. So moving forward, we need an initiative to capture data early in the workflow. And while evaluating a collection during the accessioning process, we're hoping to adapt the workflow to capture whether a collection is rich in documentation. So in other words, we want to indicate whether a collection contains extensive and detailed accounts of diversity on campus. And gathering data is also part of the inventory project that will also help us to manage resources. And the goal is to make it easier and more efficient to locate information, especially information representing diversity. And then in terms of exhibit design, well, we realize that it's important to consider time management. Working on a project like this, thinking about staff's other concurrent job duties and to divide the workload. And then another helpful piece that we learned is about simplifying design. You know, the Latinx Lions exhibit had over 80 individually cut out pieces of foam that had to be numbered to track placement on the wall for the text. And it also required each piece of foam to be, you know, measured in relation to the other pieces for even spacing. And this is time consuming to get the aesthetics correct. And, you know, and so as our exhibits are evolving, we are trying to create text and images on fewer pieces and on larger sized foam when it's possible, just because it's less time consuming and it takes fewer staff for the installation, for example. And we're hoping that fewer pieces of an exhibit allows for easier exhibit rotation. However, we know we can't have a single template the same for every exhibit because of the uniqueness of each exhibit, but still, it's all in progress. But one last final important initiative is to create a digital presence. And for this, I will turn the presentation over to my colleague, Adam Northam, who's the digital archivist. Thank you.
Unmute. Okay, thank you, Laura. I am Adam Northam, and I am the digital archivist. And I will say from the beginning of this collaboration, when we first started talking with Jason Douglas in his office, he wanted, we all wanted a digital exhibit. We thought a digital component would be really useful. At the beginning, though, we didn't really have a dedicated digital exhibit platform in place or ready to go. What we do have, and Laura mentioned it briefly in her presentation, we have a digital archive in Content DM, but that is very large and covers a wide range of collections from not only the university, but entities outside the university. So we didn't really have anything in place to do a focused, discrete digital exhibit. But having said that, we didn't want to let that slow down the initial collaboration to get this Latinx Lions exhibit up and on display. So the plan was go ahead, build our physical exhibit this first time, and then start researching digital exhibit options as we move further into the collaboration. Next slide, please. So we did go forward knowing that research needed to be done, but also even though we didn't have the full-fledged digital exhibit space, we knew we did have some digital media in our digital archive, and we started looking for easy ways where we could at least sort of somehow incorporate that into some sort of tie-in. So we decided maybe we could create some sort of digital companion piece using a platform that the library already used. I will say, in general, our digital archive that is online has a healthy mix of images, video, and audio, along with text. So we did have several pieces of multimedia information and material to choose from. Next slide, please. So the platform that the library already did use and still does use is Libguides. Libguides is really easy to use. It essentially creates sort of a website, and it's just a matter of typing your text in boxes and clicking and dragging and rearranging. So it would be really easy to at least put up a sort of digital resource guide to be a companion to whatever exhibit we were working on. And I will say, so far, the exhibit has focused on the presentation is focused on our first exhibit that we did, which was Latinx Lions. This is moving a little bit beyond that because since we've done, I think, 2 more exhibits since then. This presentation was originally meant to be given a year ago, but then when the pandemic changed everything, it delayed everything a little bit. So this is moving a little bit beyond. Right now I'm talking specifically about our second exhibit, which featured John Carlos, who was a track star, and he is known for the social justice stand he took on the medal stand at the '68 Olympics in Mexico City. He was also on the track team at our university in the mid-'60s. So in the climate of the call for social change and social justice, we felt like that was a good exhibit to go with for the next one. Next slide, please. So this is a screenshot of one of our LibGuide pages for that exhibit, which was called The Power of Protest. It's a little hard to see because I wanted to get as much of the LibGuide in the shot as I could, but on the left-hand side is the basic information about the exhibit, where it's housed, the building that it was in, the office that we created it in conjunction with, and the hours of the building. Now, the thought was, in normal times, people would have been coming and going. After people went into lockdown, several of the buildings on campus were closed for the majority of people to come through. So a lot of people didn't get to physically see the exhibit, but we at least had a few pieces. So this was our primary image. It was one of our favorite ones of him on the track team on campus, and it was heavily featured. So that was a clear choice for the first page of the LibGuide. Next slide. Again, this is not particularly easy to read, but essentially this is a list of media and materials we have related to John Carlos. The image is an image of his autobiography that was written. And then there are linked items below. These items are they were in our online digital archive. In in the year 2011, he actually came back to campus and he did speak to audiences on a couple of different occasions, and those were recorded and transferred to the archives. And of course, when you have material like that, that's the kind of thing that you would like to put online. And our digital archive has always been very willing and very interested in focusing on video and audio, things that kind of bring speaking to life, and it's a little bit more engaging. So we wanted to at least use this to highlight some of the material that, though you can't really see it in the sense of an exhibit, it was an easy way to hopefully guide people to find more information about what we have related to John Carlos and the events of his time here and after. So that's how we decided to go forward with something digital while we're still continuing to research digital exhibit platforms. Next slide, please. So we sort of had a wish list for a digital exhibit platform when we started looking. There were certain things we knew we wanted. Hosted is generally preferred for us. It eliminates most concerns related to infrastructure and maintenance. We don't have a dedicated library IT unit. We rely on campus IT, and instituting any sort of new digital initiative is going to involve them as well. So adding something to our plate is adding as much or more to their plate, because they would be the ones that would help us get it set up, get it installed, get it configured, and depending on the platform, even potentially help us do uploads or whatever, depending on what it was. So hosted was definitely more attractive to us. And we also didn't want something that required a whole lot of extensive programming or really in-depth tech knowledge, just because we wanted to get things up and moving. We want to get things up and moving as quickly as possible. So that's basically our sort of wish list for a platform. Next slide, please. So one of the first ones we looked at, whenever you start searching for digital exhibits, Omeka is one of the first ones that comes up. It's very common. It's highly visible. It's used by a wide range of institutions, and many different sized institutions use it. It's very flexible in terms of whether you want hosted or whether you want to self-manage. There's a very low barrier of entry. It's easy to at least try and experiment with and see if it's something that you want to get a little bit deeper in. They also have, one of the really attractive things about their platform is they have a tiered access model that can accommodate different sizes of digital exhibits and different ways in which you want to present material. Next slide, please. Another one that we found that I didn't even know existed until we started doing this research was the Google Cultural Institute. It's definitely a little bit of an outlier in terms of a platform. The sheer size of Google made it an interesting thing, and just to see what they're trying to achieve. So it was very heavily focused on museums. It was very focused on images. And it is a free suite of tools to help. I mean, there were some like universities and the like that were using it, but it was a lot of cultural institutions. So it was one that we probably knew we weren't going to seriously use. And the aspect that kind of solidified that was you do have to be invited you have to apply for membership and then be invited to join. So, I mean, I don't really know what all of the requirements were, but we knew that there were other options that would be able to get into easier. And also we were a little bit concerned. There wasn't a lot of talk about what kind of metadata they used or what kind of metadata schema they used. And my digital archivist mind was not comfortable just like diving in and not exactly knowing here's the schema that we're going to use to put in our data and things like that. So, but it is really interesting. And if anyone's interested, I recommend looking at it just because there's some really diverse and unique things in there. So next slide, please. Aside from something like Omeka that does have a hosted option, we did examine some open source options just to be complete. and to make sure that we were looking everywhere that we might find something useful. They are very flexible. That's one of the benefits. These are a few of the platforms we looked at. Scalar was interesting. It was from the digital humanities region of academia, and it was essentially nonlinear books. We've used a couple of JavaScript applications, sort of like Odyssey.js in the past. So that's one of the reasons we looked at the second option. It is interesting, and it's the way that you can pull in things like Google Maps or any narrative elements and multimedia that might be on a video platform or something. So, and then Project Backlight is a smaller part, or Spotlight is the smaller part of Project Backlight. Backlight is what allows you to actually build a discovery layer, say for an entire library. So that was obviously well beyond what we were looking for. So that was not one that we felt like we would be able to run, but it's worth putting on the slide, just as some of the things we found during our investigation. Next slide, please. So one of the options aside from Omeka that has emerged as a front runner is WordPress. Our university already uses it, so that's a bonus for us. The exhibits would essentially be websites, which means they would be easily accessible. The fact that our university does use it probably means that it would be easy to get support if we needed it. Being a website, it should be able to handle a wide variety of media. One issue, we haven't connected with our marketing and communications department yet to discuss what might be involved in like granting us access. We feel like once we had access to the site and learned the basics of it, it would be fairly easy to put things together the way we wanted. We are still planning at some point to meet with them. I will say within the last few months or so, one other option that might be appearing for us is digital commons. We are starting to implement a digital commons presence at our institution, and special collections and university archives will have a sort of section of that. And the thought is that perhaps we can use parts of that to highlight digital exhibits. So that's another option that's not listed here, but it looks like there is potential for it to be a useful platform for creating some sort of online digital exhibit for collaboration in the future. So there are several options, and we're still not fully decided yet, but it looks like there are choices that we can make to get hopefully what will suit us best as we move forward. And that is the end of my slides. And here's all our contact info if anyone has any questions, and we can take some questions now as well.
Thanks, you guys. Let me turn my video back on. Does anyone have any questions? I wrote down a few to ask, but I wanted to make sure there weren't any participants who wanted to ask anything first. Oh, we got a big long one. This is Courtney. She's the Deputy Director of the Texas Digital Library Consortium. She says, good job on this inter-university collaboration. It's encouraging to see your willingness to adapt and critically examine your collections. Have you considered having your content DM metadata harvested into DPLA via the Texas Hub so that you are more broadly accessible and so that you can aggregate exhibits there? And it says that they use Blacklight Spotlight exhibit space focused on Texas contributors and hosted by TDL. So it's a very specific question for your institution.
Yeah. Our content DM instance is a little bit up in the air. We are undergoing some sort of some transition with our digital archives presence. So at this point, there are no plans to harvest that metadata. Although that is one of the things I really like about content DM is it was easy to do so. But until we're through this transitional period, it's really hard to say for sure that yes, we would do that. Although if once things do settle, if there is a way to do that, that would be, you know, those kind of things. Anything to get as much of the information out to as wide a group as possible is preferable. So I can't, it's hard to, there's a lot of definite I don't know, as we're just starting a transitional period for digital archives and digital collections. So I don't know what it's going to look like in the immediate future. So.
Going back to the physical exhibit, I was wondering if you guys were aware of all the hurdles that you would have with the exhibit space that ended up with you orienting in the other direction and everything whenever you, from the outside, or if that was something you kind of discovered along the process.
Yeah, I think that was something we definitely discovered along the process, especially originally when Jason first spoke to us, and I'm so sorry he couldn't be here today, caught out in that bad storm. You know, when he first approached us, it was just Adam and I. Sawyer and Laura joined our special collections shortly afterwards. And so Adam and I had done a lot of work with digital things, but not so much with building physical exhibits. So we didn't realize some of those things that we'd have to think about. And, you know, even that first, you know, as Laura talked about, that first exhibit had so many moving parts, which is, you know, kind of the way that we thought to do it at first, but realized that simplifying it for the future would be better.
And we had done a few very, very small physical exhibits, and by very small, I mean in our own office space in the department. So that was almost like, okay, let's get these printed out and get them put in the case with a few. And so, you know, we had done that and we thought, oh, it can't be that much different. But I mean, we found ourselves online looking at how do we calculate the size of the font versus how far people might be away from the wall. And we saw all of the complexities that you can fall into just for that. And so, yeah, it was definitely a learn as you go process, I think.
What was the timeline for this project? Was this something you guys did during the pandemic or prior, or okay?
I believe we finished the first one do you remember, Joe? Like, there was time that the first one was finished before the pandemic for sure.
Yeah, I think Sawyer can talk a little bit about timeline.
Yeah, we really started looking into the very first Latinx Lines exhibit in early August, probably the first week of August or so of 2019. And then it was up in the middle of September 15th-ish. I don't remember the exact day we officially went up. So within about 6 weeks or so from here's an idea we would like to do to it's up and ready to go. About a 6-week time frame, which was a very quick turnaround considering at that point I had literally just started here at my new position here at that time in early August. And so that made it very interesting to dive right into a larger collaborative effort in our university. A very good effort and a great way to familiarize myself with some of the collections we had right away. I can tell you that for sure. But so the other exhibits, we tried to plan them out, and with the John Carlos exhibit going forward, we tried to plan out a little bit further ahead of time. That one was finished just in time for Black History Month in February of 2020. And then pandemic happened right after that and started right after that. And then so it's been kind of, so we left that one up for a lot longer. It's actually still up now. But so that's kind of, we've been trying to budget for future exhibits a little bit more time to work in to try to plan things out, in addition to, like, as Laura talked about, where we have to try to balance those with all of our other duties and responsibilities. Try to budget in a little bit more time to do that too going forward.
And part of the reason that it was such a short turnaround for the first Latinx Lines exhibit was because Jason had actually just started a few weeks beforehand. And he talked about how at the previous university that he worked, he collaborated a lot with special collections. So that was one of the first things that he wanted to do when coming to campus. And it just so happened that it lined up him coming to talk to us, figuring out that we probably had the most like content for Hispanic or Latin people, and then also the Hispanic Heritage Month starting mid-September. That's kind of what rushed that initial timeline. The other thing that led us to simplifying our exhibit was also COVID, because we weren't sure if we would be able to put up an exhibit together. So we had to simplify it enough that one person could work on it if needed. And that one person was Sawyer.
That's what happens when you're the tallest one in archives. You're going to be the one. If there's one person that puts up the exhibit, it's going to be the tallest. So.
Makes sense. Michael asks, he apologizes if he misses it in the presentation, but could you talk a bit about how you printed the panels and installed them? Was that something you did in-house, or did you use an outside vendor?
Yeah, so we actually, hi Michael, we used the poster printer that is in the library. Our library has a teacher resource center, and it has a poster printer that a lot of the educational students use for printing posters. And so we were able to use that to specifically print the images. Text we ended up printing in special collections only because they were small text blocks that could be fit on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. And so that allowed us to make any edits, if we were, physically putting the exhibit together and noticed any typos, and then mounted all of that on foam board using the spray adhesive and the positionable mounting adhesive, and then putting the foam board on the wall with command strips.
What are some of the additional exhibit ideas you all were talking about rotating through?
Does Laura want to talk about that, or I can?
Sure. We have 3 exhibits like under our belt. And one of them, the one that is currently up, it's celebrating some of the notable people on our campus, alumni representing different departments and administrators and students and athletes and homecoming queen, but all for Black excellence is the title of the exhibit. And this exhibit is a good example of one that would be fairly easy to, I think, rotate because we have simplified the exhibit to be on, there's just a handful of pieces of foam board and a banner, and we have a guest book that we could, if we wanted to rotate it around, that's one thing that we could do. And then the other exhibit that Adam had talked about was the John Carlos exhibit. So these are exhibits that are immediately produced by us that if we wanted to, and even if we wanted to scale it down some, we would have that opportunity with these, and they're kind of ready to go. And even with like as Adam talked about with John Carlos exhibit, we have that Libguide that is online, and it represents the sources that were used to create that exhibit. So like Adam shared, it's other resources that we have in the archives about it,
and
about topic.
And for the future, we always try to kind of align with like a Heritage Month or events on campus, and so it'll just kind of depend on what's happening. And also, as we get deeper into our collection and we get a better handle on inventory, we will be able to better plan out further in advance. We want to feature, an exhibit of this student group or this group that was on campus during this time. So there's a lot of the short answer to that is it's going to just kind of depend on what's happening on campus, what other groups that we collaborate with want to highlight, and what resources we can use and get put into an exhibit in the right amount of time too.
And just real quick, this is Jason's slide. I wanted y'all to be able to see it, even if he wasn't here to speak on it and show his part of the presentation.
Well, it looks like we're at 3 o'clock. I thank you guys so much for your presentation today. It's been really great to hear about how you built these relationships and your future work. And just to mention everyone, upcoming on the schedule, we have a break with vendors at 3 p.m. So I'll see you there. Everyone have a good afternoon. Thank you again.